As I'm sure you can tell by my channel's content, it's no secret that I love the science adventure series. There isn't a single mainline title that I would personally give below an 8 out of 10. But as we approach the release of Steins Gate Reboot, I wanted to take a look back at the 6 mainline SciADV entries we have thus far, and rank them from my favorite to least favorite, just for fun. Before we get started, I wanted to give a couple of disclaimers and points of clarification. First, Mages classifies Chaos at Noah, Steins Gate, Robotics Notes, Chaos Child, Occultic 9, and Anonymous Code as the series' 6 mainline entries, so these are what I will be ranking. Additionally, I will be ranking these entries according to their visual novels, except in the case of Occultic 9, where the visual novel is not the source material. In the case of Occultic 9, I will be ranking it with consideration to all 4 versions of the story, with most weight placed on the light novel and anime versions. With regards to spoilers, the audio for this video is completely spoiler-free, but when I talk about the original Steins Gate's character roots, I will show visuals depicting content from said roots. Otherwise though, this video is spoiler-free. Lastly, this channel is first and foremost a reflection of myself, a reflection of my values, and a reflection of my beliefs, so this video itself is just my opinion. If you have the exact opposite ranking as me, all the power in the world to you. Please don't get too worked up if our opinions happen to be different. This is just fiction, and people having differing opinions is perfectly normal. But without further ado, let's get started. Coming in at number 6 is Paranormal Science ADV Occultic 9, the 5th mainline SciADV entry, and what many would describe as the series' forgotten child. Really though, it is more so the forgotten child of the SciADV franchise's original creator than it is the forgotten child of the SciADV fandom. It's been 8 years since Chiyomaru Shakura has done anything with Occultic 9. All these years later, we stand here still waiting for Occultic 9 Volume 4 and Occultic 9 Elite. Really, including Occultic 9 in these rankings in the first place is a little unfair, since it just isn't yet complete while the other entries are. There is a chance that the last remaining bit of Occultic 9's story is so outstanding that it significantly rises in my personal rankings, but as it stands right now, while I really like Occultic 9 and can't wait to see it finished, compared to the other entries in the series, I just think it's a little lacking. The light novel version of Occultic 9 is pretty well fleshed out, but I feel as though it doesn't have its own identity. It feels like a mix of different elements from the first 3 main lines while not doing enough to stand out on its own. The anime version of Occultic 9 actually addresses the identity issue for me, standing out from the rest of the series through its lightning-fast dialogue and outstanding direction. But this of course comes at the cost of details that are present in the light novel version, and at the end of the day, it's still Occultic 9. Intriguingly, in every version of the story, there is a tad bit of Chaos series-like social commentary with its exploration of internet culture, and Occultic 9 also explores what Shakura describes as the meaning of life through ghosts and electromagnetic souls. But I just think that the social commentary is weak compared to everything else we have in the series. All in all, Occultic 9 is a super fun SciADV entry, but it just misses what I'm looking for. Next up, at number 5, is Speculative Science ADV Steins Gate, the second and most popular SciADV entry. Like many, my entry point into SciADV was the Steins Gate anime, and little 13-year-old me back in 2015 loved it so much I became obsessed and went through as much of the sub-series as I possibly could before eventually delving into SciADV 3 years later. To this day, so much of what I love about Steins Gate comes from its hundreds upon hundreds of hours' worth of side material. But you're only a teenager for so long. Over the years, I feel as though the original story of Steins Gate has lost the magic it once had on me. I became a lot more bothered by a couple of key aspects of it that I personally perceive as significant faults. And in that time, I came to understand what it is that I personally value out of a fictional work. Above all else, it's the message of a story, the themes explored by a story, and the social commentary present within a story. It is primarily for this reason that I have most of the other entries above Steins Gate. As for why I have Steins Gate above Occultic 9, it is true that Occultic 9 is just a tad bit stronger in the one aspect of a story that matters most to me, that being themes, but I feel as though there are a lot of little things that add up to make Steins Gate beat Occultic 9 for me. For one, I feel as though Steins Gate takes advantage of its medium more than Occultic 9 does in any of its four forms. From start to finish, Steins Gate is entirely locked into Okabe's perspective because of the whole solitary observer motif, and that adds a lot of value to the experience of Steins Gate. You come to experience Okabe's sheer dread through his eyes, and that in turn gives the game a fairly eerie atmosphere at times. In Occultic 9, part of its whole gimmick is supposed to be following more than 9 different points of view and seeing how the story makes all these 9 seemingly unrelated individuals come together in Kichijoji. But I don't think this adds as much to the Occultic 9 experience as the solitary observer motif adds to the Steins Gate experience. And in the visual novel version of Occultic 9, they abandon this gimmick and only follow Gamon's perspective, which is quite baffling as there's really no meaningful thematic reason for doing so. And these matters aside, Steins Gate is actually a finished story that sticks the landing and is very much a title with its own distinct identity in the context of the series. But that's something that remains true for every other SciADV title as well. And compared to Steins Gate, the other 4 SciADV entries are undoubtedly thematically far richer than Steins Gate is. If anything, Steins Gate is the closest thing SciADV has to a themeless story. It's obviously not actually completely themeless, since its message is that since nobody knows what the future holds, that's what makes it worth living to see. And like literally every other SciADV entry, Steins Gate is also about existentialism and the contention between free will versus determinism. But compared to everything else in this series, there's remarkably little to take away from the story of Steins Gate. It doesn't say anything meaningful that the rest of the series doesn't already say, and do better. In the first place, Steins Gate is almost completely devoid of any kind of social commentary. Comparatively, the Chaos series is an incredibly thought-provoking criticism of internet culture and the world in the age of misinformation and disinformation. Even Robotics Notes, Occultic 9, and Anonymous Code explore this idea to differing extents. In addition to those issues, this is a bit more of a minor complaint, but I vehemently dislike most of Steins Gate's character roots and its true ending flag system. Like most other SciADV games, here in Steins Gate, the true ending is borderline impossible to reach without a guide. In general, route branching is one of SciADV's single biggest weak points. But at the very least, in most other SciADV entries that have routes to begin with, they at least contribute something important to the game's story, and oftentimes even the overarching series narrative. Like in the Chaos games, while the routes themselves can often be inconsistent in quality, the presence of routes makes both narrative and thematic sense. This is especially the case in Chaos at Noah, considering the presence of routes goes hand in hand with Takumi being a delusional shut-in otaku, and the content of the routes works with the general direction of his character arc. Furthermore, part of the artistic vision behind the Chaos series was to contrast a very Galgay-like art style and appearance with its actual gruesome, grotesque, and dark content. So Chaos at Noah, and by consequence its thematic sequel Chaos Child, having heroine roots the way that a traditional Galgay would, made sense. But in Steins Gate, they moved away from this idea, opting to go for Hukei's more unique designs, primarily for the sake of broader appeal, and it certainly feels like Steins Gate had heroine roots for the same exact reason, popular appeal as opposed to thematic intent. So really, unlike the Chaos series where the roots had thematic purpose, Steins Gate only had roots because they were a staple of Galgay and ADV games, something which I believe holds true for another SciADV title, which I'll talk about in a bit. But unlike other SciADV entries, Steins Gate's roots are mostly useless, revealing remarkably little information relevant to the story of Steins Gate and to the wider series. And aside from the Suzuha route, none of the heroine routes in the game are particularly good anyways. For the most part, in Steins Gate, you follow this Giga Chad, chick magnet, mad scientist, and across the game's different endings, you effectively just give up and romance a different girl, as if they were nothing but trophies to be won. All in all, Steins Gate is still a fantastic game, and I like it more than Occultic 9. But I just think that Steins Gate is needlessly too much like a traditional Galgame for my liking, and it also just falls short in terms of what I look for out of a story. Anyhow, moving on to the number 4 spot is Augmented SciADV Robotics Notes, the third mainline SciADV entry and the first real culmination or crossover title that the series had. This entry is a phenomenal love letter to so many robot and mecha series predating it, and not just the likes of Gundam, Gunbuster, Evangelion, and so on, but also even Astro Boy of all things. And as an Astro Boy fan, Robotics Notes is one entry that I hold very near and dear to my heart because it keeps a number of Astro Boy's messages alive for today's audiences. And I think Astro Boy's themes are more relevant today than ever before as our world becomes increasingly digital and discrimination still remains prevalent. Now, you may be wondering why I have Robotics Notes in at number 4. I have Robotics Notes above Steins Gate for a couple of reasons. The main one is that it's significantly stronger thematically. Unlike Steins Gate, where social commentary is quite lacking, Robotics Notes has the same sort of social commentary on the world in the age of the internet and the age of information, like you see in Chaos at Noah. And with it having this new focus on augmented reality, it really puts a whole new perspective on exploring the blurred boundary between the real and fake, as well as addressing SciADV's series-defining question, is the scenery your eyes perceive truly real? But in addition to that, Robotics Notes has its own focus on a theme that the other SciADV entries don't touch upon very much, that being dreams. Robotics Notes is fundamentally a story about how you form dreams, how you shape dreams, how you achieve dreams, as well as how you break dreams. A substantial part of the way that Robotics Notes explores this concept is through each and every single one of its central cast members, all of whom can be examined from the lens of dreams. In general, Robotics Notes is often regarded as having the SciADV franchise's best cast, a sentiment which I wholeheartedly share. The main duo in Robotics Notes is arguably the series' absolute best, though to me, characters and character interactions are often less important aspects of a story, which is why Robotics Notes, being such a character interaction driven and slice of life heavy story, doesn't quite resonate with me as much as half of the other entries do. It's not that characters don't matter at all in a work of fiction. I would classify Robotics Notes and the 2 other Chaos games as character studies for that matter, and I very much adore all 3 of those aforementioned titles because of how well they work as character studies. But it's specifically because within them, characters are a tool they use to portray said themes, more so through the protagonist specifically in the Chaos series, and with basically the entire main cast in Robotics Notes. But at the end of the day, a story for me doesn't have to be a character study for it to resonate with me. I often hear some people tell me that they go through a story or that they like a story for the characters. That's not me. I view stories as art forms designed to convey certain messages to an audience, and so I ultimately like a story for its message first and foremost. Whether this message is conveyed through its characters or not, that really doesn't matter to me. But yeah, moving on to the number 3 spot is the SciADV entry that started them all. Delusional Science ADV Chaos at Noah, undoubtedly the most important SciADV entry, being what set up everything that followed suit. To this day, Chaos at Noah stands out to me for being the most ambitious SciADV entry and also the scariest SciADV entry. It features the most engrossing atmosphere from the entire franchise, with what I see as the series' strongest sound design. It's a game that truly earns and deserves its title, Chaos Head. It's a game that follows a ridiculously mentally unwell protagonist and also makes you feel like there's this chaos in your head. But it's crazy to reflect upon how back in the day, most thought this game would never see the light of day in the West. From the end of 2008 to February of 2023, English-speaking fans had no way to go through the full uncut Chaos Head Noah. Instead, we were stuck playing the original version of Chaos Head, which has maybe about 2/3 of the full story seen in Noah, And from the original version of Chaos Head, I actually had it in last place out of the first 4 mainlines for a good while. But the context added in Noah significantly elevated Chaos Head for me, and not simply because they improved characterization or anything, it's really because of how intertwined a lot of the roots were with what the game and what the series itself were truly trying to say. After all, is the scenery your eyes perceive truly real? I especially adored the ISA and Senna routes, which had crazy implications on our understanding of the wider series. I still vividly remember what it was like going through the Senna route for the first time. It blew my mind in a way that was incomparable to anything I'd ever experienced beforehand. But routes aside, and more importantly, Chaos at Noah also has some of the strongest social commentary seen from the entire franchise. The whole game is a huge criticism of internet culture, and one that was quite ahead of its time. As the new generation madness progresses, the whole internet just makes all the murder case names into disgustingly inappropriate puns as people continue to very insensitively poke fun at ridiculously gruesome murders with no regard to the sanctity of the victims' lives. Furthermore, you especially see the problems with internet culture through the eyes of Takumi, a completely delusional shut-in loser who wants absolutely nothing to do with the outside world, and certainly nothing to do with what's taking place in Shibuya. Takumi is effectively the embodiment of all the most extreme possible qualities of an otaku shoved together into a single person, and his character truly showcases what it's like to spend so much time online that it destroys your soul. Really, the reason most people like Takumi is not because they admire his borderline incelish beliefs and attitudes or anything. He's not supposed to be this giga-chad that everyone loves and adores. He's pathetic. The game doesn't even so much as try to place him on a pedestal. His whole character arc is about conquering that life of self-isolation and finding friends worth fighting and living for. And there's lots to learn and take away from his tale. I think a huge part of anybody's enjoyment of Chaos at Noah comes from how you perceive Takumi. Way back in 2018, when I first read the original Chaos Head, I did not like Takumi at all. But when the pandemic hit, I had to live close to 2 years shut in my apartment and isolated from the rest of humanity, with the state of the world being what it was, and the curfews that were in place where I was living. So at the time, I began to feel for myself what it was like to go from interacting with peers my age on a daily basis to not meeting a soul for close to 2 years. To this day, I still don't think I have fully recovered from that time, but that experience definitely helped me better understand Takumi, and thus not feel as judgmental. Having matured a lot in the span of the 5 years in between when I first read the original Chaos Head and when I read Chaos Head Noah, also definitely aided in my appreciation of the game. It's definitely not an entry that younger audiences will like as much. Now, I would give both Robotics Notes and Chaos Head Noah a 9 out of 10 for the most part, but I wanted to explain the 3-4 split. I have Chaos Head Noah just above Robotics Notes for a few reasons. First, I think that Chaos Head Noah is slightly stronger than Robotics Notes thematically. In my opinion, Chaos Head Noah has a much more engaging and thought-provoking approach to the way it explores its themes on the world in the age of information. And not that Kaito's character arc is anything to scoff at, but I also think that Takumi's character arc is much more profound than Kaito's. More than anything though, I just find that Chaos at Noah's central message is so much more powerful than Robotics Notes' message, especially if you at any point in your life have really struggled with loneliness and self-worth. In addition to that, there's one particular issue I have with Robotics Notes, which, while minor in the grand scheme of things, significantly sours the game for me in comparison to Chaos at Noah, and is thus something I felt was worth mentioning. Just generally, I found that Chaos at Noah's route branching was much more intuitive, and that its incorporation of routes was far more narratively and thematically sensical. Comparatively, Robotics Notes has a very similar issue to Steins Gate with its route structure, but much worse. I know their motivation behind the Tweepo-related route system was so that they could advertise it as an ADV game, But Robotics Notes' story has absolutely no reason to have roots. They actively hinder the overall experience and are truly just chapters in a linear game that you can choose to play out of order for some silly reason. And just getting each individual chapter through replying to certain tweets is an absolute chore, especially when you miss one or two by accident or make a mistake. Heck, when I was making an earlier video wherein I had to grab footage of a phase transition, I almost rage quit making it just from having to go through Robotics Notes' route branching again. In contrast, Chaos at Noah's routes are very straightforward to get to, and at the very least, they're actual routes. But that's enough about Chaos at Noah for now. Let's move on to the number 2 and number 1 spots. If you know me, you know that my favorite visual novel of all time is a tie between the two remaining SciADV entries. After all, they are almost on par with one another thematically. But I figured that for the purposes of a SciADV entry ranking video, a tie wouldn't be so appropriate given how few entries there are, and how close together they all are in quality anyhow. So the tiebreaker for me centered not around how I view them as visual novels, but rather around how I view them as SciADV entries specifically. So the number 1 spot went to what I believe to be the better SciADV entry, not necessarily the better visual novel. Anyways, at the number 2 spot is the SciADV franchise's 5th anniversary title and 4th mainline entry, Delusional Science ADV Chaos Child. Being an incredibly ambitious thematic sequel to Chaos at Noah, Chaos Child remains a fan favorite in the SciADV community to this day. And this is for good reason. It has one of the greatest endings to any story I've ever read. It's arguably the strongest SciADV entry thematically, taking Chaos at Noah's already exceptional social commentary on the world in the age of the internet, and soaring with it. And more than anything, it's an unbelievably good character study centering around Miyashiro Takeru, who I firmly regard as the series' best protagonist. Really, he's my favorite character of all time. In SciADV, we've had two extremes with protagonists. We've had the disgustingly pathetic shut-in loser, as well as the incredibly charismatic Giga Chad mad scientist who every girl loves and adores. Takeru, very much like Kaito, is in the middle of this whole spectrum. He's comparatively much more normal, which is incredibly ironic since he wants to be anything but normal. He's this stuck-up teenage boy who wants to be special and recognized by a world that's completely neglected and abandoned him. And he goes through so much throughout his journey, ending up as a completely different man by the end of the story. In true thematic sequel fashion, Takeru is also the complete polar opposite of Takumi in a number of ways. Whereas Takumi wants nothing to do with the murders and really just wants to stick to himself, Takeru actively pursues, investigates, and drags himself into them, wanting to be the first to uncover the truth, even if that comes at the cost of those closest to him. In addition to that, while Takeru is still very much a closet otaku and a chronically online loser in his own right, he's still decently social, being president of Hekio Academy's newspaper club, so Takeru is someone that I think the average person can see themselves in a lot more than Takumi. And this was also the case for me specifically. Throughout my time in school, even with my otaku interests, I still ran a lot of different clubs, the overwhelming majority of which had nothing to do with the otaku world. This is one reason why I feel as though the story of Chaos Child just resonated with me more than Chaos at Noah did. I connected on a personal level with Takeru much more than I did with Takumi. And as much as I hate to admit it, I really saw myself in even some of the worst qualities of Takeru, especially at the age of 16 when I first played Chaos Child. Now, to further explain the 2-3 split, I have Chaos Child over Chaos at Noah, mainly because I just think Chaos Child is stronger thematically. I feel as though Chaos Child handles most of Chaos at Noah's central themes even better than Chaos at Noah does. Chaos Child's criticism of internet culture extends past the examination of the terminally online and the internet's reactions to the murders. It really hammers it home on what it means to be living in a digital age where all the information in the world is available at anyone's fingertips, and where that in turn leads us to living in a world where misinformation, disinformation, and echo chambers are more prevalent than ever before. This is a game that's not really about finding whoever's behind the return of the new generation madness. It's about society. And more than that, it also delves into something that Chaos at Noah doesn't touch much upon: the traumas and general circumstances of victims of natural disasters. Given that the Tohoku earthquake happened just 3 years before Chaos Child's release, it was undoubtedly something at the forefront of the writing team's minds as they wrote the game. To me, Chaos Child is the absolute zenith of character versus society stories. All in all, Chaos Child's social commentary is straight up just stronger than that of Chaos at Noah, and that's the one thing that matters to me the most out of a fictional work. That being said, there are a few things for which I feel Chaos at Noah does better than Chaos Child. For instance, root branching and the use of the delusion trigger system. With regards to root branching, the presence of roots is just as narratively and thematically sensical in both games, but actually getting to the roots is much more straightforward and far less annoying in Chaos at Noah than in Chaos Child. Meanwhile, the delusion triggers in Chaos Child, while fitting for a character like Takeru, don't add nearly as much to the narrative as the delusions in Chaos at Noah do. But for me, these two areas don't outweigh the substantially stronger social commentary and significantly more powerful true ending in Chaos Child. But coming in at number 1 is what every part of the franchise was building up to for so long: Meta SciADV Anonymous Code, the 6th mainline SciADV entry. Anonymous Code is narratively, mechanically, and thematically the grand culmination of SciADV, and from the very beginning of the series, SciADV was always about 3 things in particular. First, addressing the question, is the scenery your eyes perceive truly real? Second, exploring the contention between free will versus determinism. And thirdly, at the intersection of both the aforementioned 2 points, it is about questioning the very nature of the world, very much like science itself. And in all 3 of these points, Anonymous Code hammers it home. It is easily the most SciADV game. It truly embodies everything SciADV was ever about, especially from a thematic standpoint. Heck, I still get goosebumps reading Hayashi's author comment in Anonymous Code's accompanying guidebook. That being that Anonymous Code is the final position of the question that the series was created to explore, the question that fundamentally defined SciADV. And it's a game that has the exact same message as SciADV has always had as a franchise. For any longtime fan of the series, this game is such an unbelievable treat. It addresses so many long-standing series mysteries from even some of the most obscure pieces of SciADV side material. It's just mind-blowing reveal after mind-blowing reveal in this game, recontextualizing hundreds upon hundreds of hours' worth of content. I spent 14 months working on my 97-minute long Anonymous Code implications video, and there are still numerous points that I didn't even get the chance to talk about. No other SciADV title could get me to do that much for a single video. There truly isn't a single part of SciADV that Anonymous Code doesn't drastically recontextualize in some way. And as someone who'd been into Steins Gate since 2015 and SciADV at large since 2018, I can attest that at a fundamental level, Anonymous Code completely changed the way that people discussed and theorized about the series. This was a game that changed everything for SciADV, advancing the series' storyline far more than the previous several mainline entries did combined. If SciADV ended at Anonymous Code, I'd have been more than satisfied. It's such an incredible send-off to, I guess, what you can call the original saga of SciADV. And this was the primary reason that I have Anonymous Code above Chaos Child. Anonymous Code is the series' most important title after Chaos at Noah being above it since that's what started the series, but hey, depending on what direction they end up taking the series in, Anonymous Code could very well overtake Chaos at Noah for that spot. Chaos Child, meanwhile, is the series' least important mainline title. Now, it's a phenomenal visual novel, one that keeps you thinking about it for years after reading it, but it's also undoubtedly the filler entry of the series. You could skip the whole Chaos Child subseries and lose remarkably little of value in the context of the wider series. For the most part, Chaos Child is just a semi-self-contained character study in the world of SciADV. Yes, it's a sequel to Chaos at Noah in every way besides the cast, and it does explore certain topics from Chaos at Noah in a different light, but at the end of the day, it introduces very little into the series' world. In terms of series-wide narrative, it's a game that doesn't really have much bearing on what comes afterwards, nor does it recontextualize all that much from prior titles. It's just another Chaos game written by a guest writer. In those respects, it's a little ironic that Chaos Child and Anonymous Code are my two favorite SciADV entries when they're polar opposites of one another in those regards. Chaos Child is a fantastic character study, but next to useless as a SciADV entry since it does remarkably little for the overarching series narrative. Meanwhile, Anonymous Code does the most for the overarching series narrative, but isn't a character study at all. Anonymous Code is both the embodiment of everything SciADV has ever been about, and yet also a huge departure from a lot of long-standing series norms. And that's another big part of why I like Anonymous Code more than the other entries. It's different in ways that address a lot of aspects about the series that I didn't like. Most of the other SciADV titles have a structure wherein they have a slow first half filled with slice of life and character interactions, and then a roller coaster thriller of a second half. While this does make the second half very impactful, getting to that point can be a bit of a slog sometimes. But Anonymous Code scraps that formula altogether and puts its foot on the accelerator from start to finish, featuring the series' tightest narrative and best pacing. Anonymous Code is a game that hardly wastes any time at all. It's incredibly action-packed from start to finish and hardly ever lets up, which is something I greatly appreciate. It made Anonymous Code a more engaging experience than the other titles, which could often end up feeling a little bit bloated. Anonymous Code is short, sweet, and to the point, and I much preferred Anonymous Code's significantly heavier focus on the narrative and themes than on characterization for the sake of characterization, as was sometimes seen in earlier titles. Speaking of characters, a lot of the earlier titles like the Chaos games and Steins Gate have a very traditional Galgay-like design whereby you have a male MC and then a whole harem of girls with their own roots. While there is an artistic and thematic reason for this design in the Chaos duology, in all three of the aforementioned cases, it does take me out of the experience a little. Like in Steins Gate, you play as this insanely charismatic mad scientist who just happens to have every major girl in the story in love with him, at least at some point in the game. And then across its different endings, you just give up and romance a different girl. And those endings contribute next to nothing to the story. Even in Chaos Child, while the roots are purposeful, they're inconsistent in quality, often a little bloated, and just getting to them is a huge chore. But in Anonymous Code, thankfully, they got rid of heroine roots, which was a decision the SciADV team had taken from the time the game was initially conceived. The inclusion of character roots and root branching in general has always been one of my single biggest gripes with SciADV as a franchise. But in Anonymous Code, instead, they opted for a much more sensical linear story with 19 different bad endings, which add a fair bit of tension throughout the middle of the story. Some of these bad endings even have genuine wider series story and lore implications, which make them more useful than some entire character roots we've had in earlier SciADV entries. So that significantly boosted my enjoyment of Anonymous Code. For the first time ever, you could complete the game without ever looking at a guide. I think it's just a much better designed game than the other entries. In addition to that, with respect to the characters, there's a near even number of male and female characters in Anonymous Code, which solidified the overall tone of the story and also made it easier for me to take the game seriously. And with that, Anonymous Code very comfortably has the strongest male cast in the entire series. Polon, Cross, Wind, Oz, Kaoru, Asuma, Graham, and Kent are all really cool. I just find that generally, Anonymous Code has a much more balanced and realistic cast than is typical of SciADV, with how earlier titles were often comprised of overly eccentric otaku. And while that does make earlier casts entertaining at times, the average person you come across is not going to be Takumi or Okabe. So I do appreciate the approach they took with Anonymous Code's cast, with the exception of maybe one character. I can understand that some people, especially those of whom regard characters and character interactions as the most important part of a fictional work, would have perhaps liked to have had more downtime with the cast. but I firmly believe that this should have strictly come in the form of side material or a fan disc. Adding in heroine roots or bloating the game with excessive slice of life and character interactions would go against the very artistic vision of the game for it to be rapid, fast, and frantic. And it also just wouldn't make much narrative sense to needlessly have slice of life scenes when the stakes are so high from the get-go. Anonymous Code is definitely a lot more divisive than past SciADV titles, but its public reception really pissed me off. Now, I was fortunate enough to be able to review the game before its public launch, and the overwhelming majority of reviewers, including myself, were very positive about the game. Nonetheless, I expected to see people complain about the price in countries where regional pricing was messed up, and I expected to see some people not like Anonymous Code as much because it's shorter, even though I love it because it's shorter. And I expected to see some people wish that there was more time dedicated to characterization, even though I don't. But a lot of the complaints out there are along the lines of the girls not being cute, the game sucking because there aren't any heroine roots for people to romance girls in, and worst of all, it's supposedly ruining the series. Be sure to watch the post-credits section to my Anonymous Code implications video if you would like to hear more of my thoughts on this matter, since its reception truly highlighted to me just how dead media literacy is. If you think Anonymous Code ruins the series, you never understood anything about SciADV or anything it was trying to argue from its inception. All in all, Anonymous Code is a series-defining game for SciADV, being the franchise's grand culmination from a narrative, mechanical, and thematic standpoint. It embodies everything the series was ever trying to say thematically, and advances the series' storyline more than any other title before it with absolutely insane lore implications. Moreover, on top of having what I perceive as the series' best soundtrack, it has the franchise's strongest production values, boasting about as many CGs as Chaos Child, a game over 2.5 times its length, while also having absolutely breathtaking manga trigger panels in every chapter of the game. Anonymous Code is truly a treat for the eyes and an incredibly engaging experience from start to finish, more so than any prior SciADV title. More than anything, it is the one SciADV title that takes strongest advantage of the medium, being a story that is extremely difficult, if not outright impossible, to tell outside of a video game due to ingeniously having the player and protagonist be two entirely separate entities. Overall, Anonymous Code easily takes the cake for me as being my favorite SciADV entry. Please let me know your overall rankings for the mainline SciADV entries in the comments, as well as why you rank them the way you do. If we have the same ranking, that's neat. And if you have the exact opposite ranking as me, I think you're probably a wrong-sider, but hey, all the power in the world to you. Now, there's always multiple elements to any fictional work that aggregate into a whole, but please let me know what it is about a work of fiction that matters most to you. Is it the story's message and themes like it is for myself? Is it the characters? Or is it perhaps something entirely different? What is it that you value the most? On a separate note, if you would like to see me do another video wherein I go through each and every single SciADV game, including side entries like Steins Gate Zero, Robotic Zones Dash, and the Love Choo Choo games, and so on, please let me know as well. I think that would be pretty neat to do after Steins Gate Reboot and the fan translation of the Love Choo Choo games are out. But with that in mind, I'll see you later, Anons.